Watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamonn Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamonn.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, it's 7 o'clock. I'm Michelle Dewberry. And well, you lucky people, for one night only, I am in for Farage. And according to reports today, 3 members of the delegation attending the peace talks between Ukraine and Russia have been poisoned. One of the victims, well, you'll never guess, none other than the Russian entrepreneur, Roman Abramovich. What on earth is going on? And speaking, of course, about peace talks, Zelensky says that he will be open to discussing the adoption of a neutral status for Ukraine. Is this the answer to give us the peace everybody needs? And if so, why wasn't that the starting point? Could this horrific conflict have been avoided? And the world is going mad, I tell you, over Will Smith storming the stage at the Oscars and whacking Chris Rock for mocking his missus. Is violence ever acceptable? And I'll be having a pint. Well, I say a pint. I mean a Prosecco, because I'm a lady, after all, with businessman extraordinaire, former owner of Crystal Palace, award-winning broadcaster, and perhaps his top achievement of all time, he's also my bloke. Who? Simon Jordan. All that to come and more, but first, the latest news headlines.
Michelle, thank you. The top stories this hour. As Michelle was saying, Chelsea FC owner Roman Abramovich and at least 2 Ukrainian peace negotiators are reported to have suffered from what's being called a suspected poisoning. The Wall Street Journal newspaper says the incident happened, followed a meeting in Kiev early this month. The US newspaper says the Russian oligarch suffered symptoms including sore eyes and peeling skin. Meanwhile, the Foreign Secretary says Vladimir Putin's forces are abducting Ukrainian politicians, activists and journalists as Russia fails to meet its military targets. Liz Truss called it an abhorrent tactic, and earlier the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres appealed for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to allow for progress in serious political negotiations. And the Mariupol city mayor estimated around 160,000 people were still trapped in the city without heating or basic needs. Liz Truss re-emphasised the need to stop President Putin.
We know that Putin is not serious about talks. He is still wantonly bombing innocent citizens across Ukraine. And that is why we need to do more to ensure that he loses and we force him to think again. We need to ensure that any future talks don't end up selling Ukraine out or repeating the mistakes of the past.
Liz Truss. Well, the Chancellor has been accused of doing very little for those who are out of work and relying on benefits. But giving evidence to the Treasury Select Committee, Rishi Sunak defended his spring statement, saying it would have been irresponsible for the government to have borrowed more to raise benefits in the face of rising inflation. Pupils in England who are at risk of falling behind in core subjects are going to be offered targeted support, such as tutoring sessions. The school's white paper also requires all schools to teach for at least 32.5 hours a week by September 2023. The Education Secretary says teachers' starting salary will also increase to £30,000 a year, and they're making £180 million worth of investment in the early years workforce. He also made this pledge to parents.
All parents want their children to be happy and to grow up to a future that is full of promise. So I'm today making a pledge to parents. It is a pledge from me and from this government via schools to all families. The parent pledge is that any child that falls behind in English or maths will receive timely support to enable them to reach their potential.
Oh, it's a Zahawi there. Well, as you've been hearing, there was drama at the Oscars ceremony in LA last night when the actor Will Smith hit the host Chris Rock during the awards ceremony. It happened when the host made a joke about the actor's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. And it happened just minutes before Will Smith picked up Best Actor for his role in King Richard. Speaking to GB News, the Conservative MP Diana Davison explained why she's raising awareness over one-punch assaults.
I think it's understandable wanting to defend your loved ones. And actually, in a way, that's very much why I set up this all-party group, because the reason I'm so passionate about this issue is because my own father was killed by a single punch. But there are ways to stand up for what you believe in, to stand up for your loved ones without resorting to violence and without resorting to the sort of act we saw from Will Smith. And that's what I really want to raise awareness of there, that violence is not the answer.
Hello, Davis. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Now back to Farage with Michelle.
Thanks for that. Well, peace in Ukraine, of course, is a topic on everyone's mind at the moment. And I've got to say, there's been quite a few updates on that front today, not least the staggering update today, according to reports in the Wall Street Journal, that 3 members of the Ukrainian peace delegation have reportedly been poisoned. One of them, as we're saying, none other than the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. I've got to say, I found this part bizarre, but he forms part of the peace talks. The billionaire and at least 2 members of his Ukrainian counterparts fell ill shortly after a meeting in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, early this month. Well, with me in the studios to look at this is Jonathan Steele, an international affairs journalist. Jonathan, good evening to you. Now, we've heard about poisonings a few times now, haven't we? Salisbury, Litvinenko. This is, let's face it, the Russians have form for this kind of behaviour. Do you think this is what's happened here?
Well, it's very obscure because it happened in Kiev. So how did the Russians get the poison, if it was the Russians, into Kiev? Obviously, in a very secure area at the moment because of war, when people are hiding in bunkers and the rest of it. So it's extremely obscure. But one of the interesting things is we didn't know Roman Abramovich was part of this peace effort at all. So that's a revelation in itself, that he's perhaps trying to mediate between Putin and Zelensky.
Well, yeah, because he's been given the nod, of course, to do this by Putin. What's behind that? Because I have to say, as I alluded to there, I find that personally quite bizarre that Abramovich is involved in this way.
Exactly. I mean, maybe he's trying to recoup his image and come across as some kind of statesman, not just a football club owner, an entrepreneur, an oligarch, but that he's actually bringing peace to Ukraine. Perhaps it's just an image-building thing.
Or perhaps he just wants access back to his cash as quickly as possible. Joining me now also down the line, we've got Charles Crawford, a former British ambassador. Good evening to you, Charles. The news of this poisoning, did it shock you today?
Well, I think I've gone well beyond the point where anything shocks me in this current situation. But I think part of the point of, if I can call it, Russian/Soviet negotiating technique is to try to work out what would shock the other side and then do it precisely because you're not expecting it. So I think when you're looking at these negotiations going on, it's very as Jonathan said, it's very hard to follow what exactly is happening because we don't know who is authorized on behalf of whom to say what. There may be unofficial discussions going on and talks about talks. And one of the things you'd have to have the talks about is who fills the water bottles, stuff like this. I mean, this is the level of detail you have to go down to before you can have people seriously looking at each other in the eye and talking about the war.
Yeah, and Jonathan Steele, I mean, further peace talks, I mean, this is going to be ongoing, I suspect, for a period of time, but I found it quite interesting. Zelensky has now come out and suggested that he would consider a position of neutrality for Ukraine. Personally, I found that quite a pivotal admission. I wonder your thoughts on this. Is this the answer to the Ukrainian conflict, neutrality for Ukraine?
I think it would be the answer, and in fact it used to be part of the official defence strategy of Ukraine to be neutral, and it was only changed 2 or 3 years ago in the constitution that they want to become members of NATO. So it's quite acceptable that they should be neutral. And the model, of course, is what's happened to Austria. Austria in 1955 had Soviet troops on its soil, American troops, British troops, and they signed a decree of neutrality, which all the foreign troops withdrew, and it's all guaranteed by the United Nations Security Council, the state neutrality of Austria. And this is really the model that would be very good for Ukraine. It would relieve a lot of the tension in Moscow, and it wouldn't really undermine the security of Ukraine itself.
Charles Crawford, do you agree with that?
I think I broadly agree with it, but I think the issue here is what is it you're being neutral from? And I think we have to be a little bit careful about telling Ukraine it ought to be neutral, because what you're really saying is that someone in the schoolyard who is threatened by the bully should sort of bow down and look the other way. I mean, this is a very... The reason countries like Poland and the other former communist countries wanted to join NATO was to get away from Russian bullying. That's one of the key reasons. And also to weed out the Russian intelligence services that were operating inside their country, inside their own armies. And NATO has helped a big deal in that way. So excluding that for Ukraine is quite a big commitment by Ukraine.
But Charles, would you concede, I mean, a lot has been made now of NATO's eastward expansion. Many people would say that Russia feels threatened by the expansion of NATO closing in essentially on its border. What would you say to that?
Well, I'd say that Russia, there's all this talk been going on for decades about how Russia is being encircled. You've got to remember how much of the planet Russia encircles. Russia knows perfectly well that NATO is not a military threat to Russia in any sense that matters. They just know that. What Russia can't stand is the fact that as an empire, which is what Russia is losing its imperial sway over different Slav populations. And this is difficult for them to accept. I can understand it's difficult for them to accept. But then to go into Ukraine in the way it's done, to cause such, incredible violence and to do such damage to Russia itself is a form of insanity. So you can see why the Ukrainians don't want to be under their influence. No one would.
Jonathan, is this insanity?
Insanity to be trying to keep out of NATO?
No, the Russians, the perspective here that actually are Russia acting basically insane. Is this whole kind of narrative, this concept about, we're doing this because we want to fend off NATO expansion. Is that fair, valid or not? Well,
I mean, I don't like the word they use, insanity, or talking about mad Vlad and he's off his rocker and so on. I mean, countries do have interests, and Putin isn't alone. Most of the elite in Russia and a lot of ordinary Russians themselves feel threatened by the West and do feel that NATO expansion was excessive and a betrayal of promises made in 1990, 1991 to Mikhail Gorbachev when he was the Russian leader by the West. So there's a lot of thinking that's anti-NATO for good reasons in Russia. It's not insanity.
And what would you say about, of course, Ukraine used to have nuclear weapons, and when those were kind of disbanded, there were promises essentially, and I'm simplifying this, but there were promises essentially that Ukraine would be safe if they gave those weapons up.
Well, that was done in 1994, and there's actually quite a discussion going on among international lawyers about whether, if circumstances change, treaties still have the same validity as they had when they were signed. In this case, it was 1994, so that's more than 30 years ago almost since that was signed. And in the meantime, NATO has expanded enormously, so the Russians would argue that the guarantees they gave in 1994 have fallen by the wayside because the West has expanded NATO.
Yeah, and Charles, another idea that's been discussed over the last kind of 24 hours or so is essentially a splitting of Ukraine, the West going one way, the East going to another. What would you say to that? Is that a potential solution?
Well, diplomatic solutions can be whatever people agree on. There's no reason why that couldn't be part of a solution. The issue is whether or not Ukraine would accept it. And why should Ukraine accept that Russia is going to come in and steal its territory? It's quite clear that Ukrainian territory has been recognized by international law, by the whole planet. So what you're really saying is, well, if Russia has its fears of NATO, it's entitled to steal bits of Ukraine. That's a pretty extraordinary doctrine to adopt, I think. Now, it's also possible that you might be able to say, okay, here's a package. Ukraine becomes neutral. Certain territories of Ukraine get special status, special links with Russia, certified by the UN, blah, blah, blah. Russia can be taught in Ukrainian schools. I mean, there are things you can put into that package to make it acceptable. But for Ukraine to accept that, it has to have Russia's foot taken off its neck. And, you know, Russia has to start showing some serious goodwill. And that's the risk of all these ceasefires, is that Russia simply uses those ceasefires to, you know, to prop up its sagging army.
Well, that's Charles Crawford, Jonathan Steele's thoughts there. And I want to know your thoughts. Do you think that neutrality could be the thing that ends the war? And by the way, what would that even look like? Because according to Zelensky, he would like to open that up to a referendum, giving everyone the opportunity to vote in that. I mean, that itself is estimated could take about a year. I mean, goodness me, what state would Ukraine be in by then? Do you think Russia would even agree to a ceasefire in the meantime? Get in touch with me. Email farage@gbnews.uk, or you can use the hashtag on Twitter, Farage on GB News. Let me know your thoughts there. Now, I also want to talk to you about the absolute, what I would personally call, one of the biggest travesties of my lifetime, certainly, the closing of the schools because of COVID. Do you remember all of this? For some bizarre reason, it was decided that school children should bear the brunt of a lot of the COVID restrictions. To give you some context here, 270 million school days were missed during that first full year of the health crisis. I mean, and here we are today, seeing the end result of all of this. Mental health problems in kids through the roof. Kids way behind where they need to be. You've got a whole roster now of so-called ghost children that didn't even go back to school after some of these restrictions. What we're going to do to address all of this? Well, the school's white paper, the first one in 6 years, none less, has set out a series of new measures to support kind of catching these children up. It's full of various different ambitions, including things like schools will offer a minimum school week of 32.5 hours by September 2023. Got to say, though, the flaw in that plan is that most schools do that now anyway. They also want to tweak the salaries of teachers, starting salaries to be £30,000 a year. Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Zena Hobson, who's the former chair of Ofsted. Good evening to you. This government white paper, the first one, as I mentioned, in 6 years, it seems to me to be tinkering around some of the edges. The COVID restrictions, unfairly, I would argue, placed on school children. We're going to feel the effects of this for years and years to come, are we not?
I absolutely agree that the emphasis that was put on things like the Nightingale hospitals, the strategy around health, schools were woefully ignored and neglected, and therefore young people have been woefully ignored and neglected throughout the pandemic. And we had an opportunity with the white paper to have a real root and branch rethink about what education needs to be in the 21st century, and to look at how we can change the curriculum and bring in a skills-based curriculum, enhance creative and critical thinking, to bring in more sport, more education. Just taking a small part of this, if you're going to extend the school day, do it by something meaningful and do it in partnership with voluntary and local organisations to provide really enriching activities. But what this does is pick at little things, and in my view has far too much emphasis on looking again at who manages and runs schools instead of what education should all be about.
What should education all be about in your mind?
I think what we should be looking at is, what do we need our young people to leave schools able to do? What do we need them to know? What skills do we need them to have? What are our employers looking for? And actually, we have a curriculum that is still very, very based on the acquisition and retention of knowledge and information in particular, rather than on developing skills that employers want, whether those are sort of your softer skills, your leadership, your creativity, your critical thinking, or whether they are actually skills that allow you to develop an inquiring mind, to look at being able to research, to be able to evidence, to be able to identify fake news, to be able to understand and use the internet better, and to use those skills to impart knowledge and content and information. So flipping it on its head to make sure that the heart of digital literacy is at the heart of everything we do. And whilst I would always welcome the teaching of English, the teaching of literacy, the teaching of maths, just pushing this up by a few percent in 7 or 8 years' time is not really the kind of radical change I think we need right now.
Yeah, and what about this whole kind of disparity between the North and the South? Because, you know, if we look at the learning losses, if you like, if I pick somewhere like, I don't know, the North East, the pupils in the North East have lost, on estimate, 1.3 months. If I compare that to, say, the South West, pupils there have lost 0.3 months. Why do you think there is such a disparity in education between the North and the South?
I think there are a number of reasons, and actually that's about the quality of teaching and learning is one of those reasons. However, there is a fundamental issue here about poverty. And when you look at a lot of places in the North, and many in the South, but more in the North, poverty is a very big barrier to learning. And equally, when you look at living in poor homes, you've often got houses where there are many people, there's a lack of quiet space to learn. So even children who were given a laptop to take home and learn, often the only room that they weren't sharing was the loo. And that's where they were expected to learn. So I think you will find when you unpick a number of these figures, it's actually about the barriers between those people who have wealth and those people who don't.
And do you think there's almost like an expectation for the education sector, schools, to pick up some elements of basic parenting that I personally believe should be happening in the home? It's not happening often in the home, so teachers are now having to deal with various things. We often hear about children attending, for example, primary schools that are not toilet trained, that are not having like basic communication skills. Are schools being unfairly expected to do elements of parenting?
I think that transition in early years, and I think although we've tinkered around with it, we have a very good early years foundation stage. And I think a free provision of nursery provision before school is absolutely essential. And that should mean that when you get into sort of year one and you're out of your early years stage, that a lot of those vital, important developmental milestones have been met. I don't believe that schools are doing parents' jobs. But I do think we need to actually empower teachers to have the respect that perhaps they are losing from some parents. And we need to have systems that support teachers and support schools in holding young people to account for behaving in reasonable ways. However, they are much more likely to behave in reasonable ways if the quality of the teaching and learning is good in that school.
Dr. Zena Hobson, that's the former chair of Ofsted there. Thanks for your time. Let me know your thoughts on this, by the way, at home. I'm fascinated. I personally do think there's a lot of parents that seem to think that they can just pack their kids off to school and the teachers will deal with it. I think there's a lot of failure when it comes to parenting. What do you think there? Get in touch with me. You can tweet me tonight at Michelle Jubes, or you can email farage@gbnews.uk. Going to take a quick break. When I come back, have you seen all the goings on at the Oscars last night? Got to say, I'm not someone that follows these kind of award ceremonies, but you can't help but have seen what's gone on. I refer, of course, to Will Smith smacking Chris Rock. We'll have that and more after the break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamonn Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamonn.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Farage with me, Michelle Dewberry, covering for Nigel for one night only. At the start of the programme, we were talking about Ukraine and all of the goings-on with the peace talks there between, of course, Russia and Ukraine. And I asked you the simple question. Zelensky has been referring to Ukraine potentially open to being neutral with a view to trying to end the war. Do you think Ukrainian neutrality could end the war? One viewer has been in touch saying it's worked for Finland for over 80 years, neutrality and no NATO. Chris says the Ukraine going neutral is one way to end the conflict. Kevin says Putin might say yes, but then ignore it. He said yes to corridors before and then bombed them. Charlie says neutrality was an offer before the war. What has Zelensky achieved? The destruction of his country. Darren says, well, not now that Joe Biden has hinted at regime change in Russia. Putin will not take that lightly or as a joke. I've got to say, there's been lots of comments on Joe Biden's comments. Of course, people have very quickly rode back from what Biden was suggesting there about regime change, saying that it's not a US official position, so we shall see what happens with that. But do you watch the Oscars? Got to make a huge confession here. I don't. I have precisely zero interest when it comes to all of these award ceremonies. I cannot stand being lectured to about how I should live my life by a bunch of very, very well-paid actors who are very distant from the real world. And the Hollywood workerati last night got themselves in a proper spin because you, I'm sure by now will have seen it. Will Smith stormed the stage and basically whacked Chris Rock. Let's have a listen to that.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? that was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the out of me.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth.
Wow, dude.
Yes.
It was a G.I. Jane joke.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth.
I'm going to, okay?
Wowzers, I heard that from here. I've got to say, I wouldn't mess around with Will Smith, would you? The reason I was saying, by the way, that the kind of Hollywood workerati got themselves in a state because 1 minute they're laughing away at a joke, then we've just seen what happened there. The next minute, they're celebrating when Will Smith went on to win an award. So joining me now is Joe Hemmings, behavioural psychologist and relationship coach to the stars, to look at this. Good evening to you. Now, this, I've got to say, Joe, has divided opinion. You've got a man, Will Smith, essentially defending the honour of his wife. She's got an illness, alopecia, and she's been mocked by Chris Rock on a stage in front of, well, a viewing public of millions of people. Does that make it acceptable to get up and hit Chris Rock?
No, I mean, nothing in terms of sort of abuse or assault is acceptable. However, I can see where he was coming from. He's had a build-up for a long time about attacks on his personal life, his open marriage. I think he had a sort of preemptive sense that Chris Rock was going to say something. And then, of course, what Chris Rock did was, which is really not funny in any shape or form, is to sort of make a joke about Jada's alopecia. And at that point, you can see him laughing for a moment. And then he thinks, okay, this is actually not funny. He gets up with the burst, a rush of adrenaline, of cortisol, of testosterone, I mean, all those huge hormones. And we've all felt it in the past. We've all thought, I just want to come punch somebody. He actually did it. That's the only difference. He actually went up there and was reckless enough, but didn't think about the consequences. And that anger was just overwhelming. And he'd had enough. And yeah, he punched him. And it's very clear. People say it's a bit of a slap or whatever. It might have been staged. Absolutely not. You can see the processes. He was determined to go and slap him. The look of actually satisfaction on his face when he did it. And then, of course, when he gave his Best Actor award, it was a bit bumbling. It was very tearful. He was quite distressed. I mean, suddenly, I think the acknowledgement of what he'd done sort of hit home during that speech. So it's as you say, it's the Hollywood glitterati and the humanity just buffering together that he found really hard to cope with.
Yeah, Joe, we live in a society now where basically anyone can have anonymity to say pretty much anything that they want to on places like social media without any consequences, really. And I found this quite fascinating from the perspective of, yes, a joke is a joke. We've all got senses of humour, you know, whatever. But actually, taking the mick out of an illness that someone has no control over whatsoever, surely there is a line there. And I think for a very long time, people have been able to do that behind keyboards, etc. So actually, I wonder, do you think this is perhaps people starting to become accountable for the words that they speak?
Well, yeah, indeed. I mean, you're exactly right. So people do this via their keyboards. And there's a lot of, info about trolling and what they're thinking and whether you should engage with them. But here was a real-time situation. And here were real emotions. And as you absolutely say, it's horrible to mock a medical condition, which is exactly what he did. So it's a very unfunny jibe. And there was an opportunity, rare as they are in real life, to engage. His anger took him to a place where he thought, I'm going to engage with this guy. I'm going to punch his lights out. He didn't quite do that, but he gave him quite a hard hit. And that must feel quite good when a lot of our engagement is via social media and it builds up inside us. We don't get out, I guess, the resentment, the anger that we feel about people abusing us on social media in an effective way. Actually, what we really want to do is kind of slap them. We want to hurt them. We want to do something. We can't do that. We've got to kind of sit behind that boundary. But when that opportunity arises, that was not a premeditated punch, but it also wasn't totally spontaneous either. It was a build-up of a lot of anger and resentment, and he had to do it in that moment. And I think, although it's wrong, it does resonate with a lot of people, though it left their audience really not knowing how to react, really not knowing. Half of them said they weren't actually there when it happened. Very few of that Hollywood bunch were willing to give an opinion on it. And yeah, of course, when he wins Best Actor award, you're all celebrating. It's like that moment's over and we don't have to address it.
Joe Hemmings, thanks for your insight there. Lots of you getting in touch with me on the email about this topic. Ian says, Michelle, it's a good job he was on a stage, because if he was up here in the north, he'd have been taken out into the car park and had 7 bells knocked out of him. Ian, I'm saying nothing. There you go, lots of you. Ron says, Michelle, what about police officers? They verbally abused themselves and their families all the time. Can you imagine if they walked around hitting people? Would people stand up and applaud them if they did that? I doubt it. Also, got to say, lots of you emailing in, Michelle, what are you doing? that was fake. Was it? Do you think that? I have to say, I've spent a bit too much of my time today watching slow motion videos of this slap. Someone's even sent to me a still image with all kinds of diagrams drawn onto it that I can sit in my spare time and assess to look at whether or not it was fake. Do you care? What do you think about this? Get in touch and let me know. Is it ever acceptable to whack someone just because they say something that you don't like? Tweet me at Michelle Jubes, email farage@gbnews.uk. Now, WTF, I'm reliably informed. This is one of the best parts of Nigel's shows. And what I want to talk to you tonight is the mainstream media. What on earth are they doing? Some of you might have realised that various people at various stages at times have been pointing out things that have been going on. So, for example, where did COVID come from? Do you remember that whole Wuhan lab? Dare anyone suggest that actually COVID might have originated in a lab in Wuhan? You were almost laughed out of town. Now, fast forward, and guess what? Of course, mainstream media are now admitting perhaps that was indeed the case. Then we move on to the whole lockdown, the COVID. Do you remember asking innocent questions like, a death from COVID? Was it from COVID? Because of COVID? Or what? Are these lockdowns doing more harm than good? Again, you were called, lashed out in fact, for being called a COVIDiot. And now, of course, we're seeing the mainstream media catch up, asking themselves the questions about with versus from, lockdowns, the harms that they caused, monumental mistakes on a global scale. That was in the Daily Mail. Brings me on nicely to Hunter Biden. Do you remember anyone daring to criticise or even talk about the laptops, the emails? Again, conspiracy, so they said. Shut down, so they did. And what's happening now? Well, lo and behold, it's been confirmed that some of the rumours about the emails and the laptops were indeed true. Again, Sleepy Joe. Anyone dared to criticise Joe Biden again? Shut down you were, criticised you were. What's happening now? You guessed it. The mainstream media have decided to play catch-up. We're seeing a whole plethora now of articles, people distancing themselves from some of the things that Sleepy Joe is saying. So well done, mainstream media. You're getting there in the end. And another story that's caught my eye today, P&O Ferries, the conversation rumbled on. Now, I admit I am indeed a capitalist myself, but I'm a fan of responsible capitalism. And what P&O Ferries did, making these 800 people redundant on a Zoom call, whilst it might have been a sign of the times, it was appalling behaviour. So what do? Well, of course, we've seen select committees, we've seen jumped-up politicians and the rest of them acting in a way that if I was the CEO of P&O Ferries, I would have told them to go do one. But he didn't, of course. The CEO sat there, put himself through a humiliating ordeal, answering various different questions, admitting that he cut out the unions because, quite frankly, he knew that they were never going to admit to anything or agree to anything that he wanted them to do. But the thing that's given me cause for concern is how many people have been demanding that the government steps in and nationalises P&O Ferries. I mean, I have to press pause for thought here. Because those people, and maybe you're one of them, that shout anytime anything goes wrong, quite frankly, and demands that the government steps in and fix it all, nationalise, they say. I wonder, have you thought about this? P&O Ferries recorded £100 million loss. So if you're one of those that want to nationalise P&O Ferries, do me a favour, explain to me why we, the taxpayer, should pick up a failing private sector business. Why should we pick up the bill for £100 million of losses? I can't think of a single reason. Can you? And do you remember when GBNews first launched, we used to talk about advertisers, didn't we? IKEA was one. And in June last year, some of you may recall, when IKEA took to Twitter. People were there, you know how it went by now. People that didn't like the idea of GBNews. And I say the idea, by the way, because GBNews hadn't even launched when people started crying about what GBNews may or may not be. Lambasting kind of brands, doing pylons, let's face it, doing pylons on social media, demanding to know why some brands were advertising on GBNews. IKEA was one of the ones that responded. I remember them putting a tweet out, actually, that said the following. IKEA has not knowingly advertised on GB News. We have safeguards in place to prevent our advertising from appearing on platforms that are not in line with our humanistic values and vision, to side with the many people. They added, we're in the process of investigating how this may have occurred to ensure it won't happen again in the future, and we've suspended paid daily advertising. In the meantime, well, I've got to say, I started thinking about these humanist values and being on the side of many. Some of you may recall that this very same IKEA in 2021 was ordered by a French court to pay a €1 million fine for spying on its French staff. They were found guilty of improperly gathering and storing data on its employees. And now, this humanistic brand on the side of the many has had to apologise again after bosses, get this, inadvertently filmed staff using the toilets at work. They installed CCTV above the stalls. Well, above the toilet, should I say. The furniture giants have published the findings into the probe. They've basically been looking at surveillance cameras placed above 10 bathrooms at a distribution centre in Peterborough. I mean, come on now, what can I say? What a humanistic brand IKEA is, and I'm so pleased it is indeed on the side of the many. Right, so let's get back to our top story, the conversations about peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. I asked you, what do you reckon? Will Ukrainian neutrality end the war? David says that nobody should have to accept terms because they're being bullied. Ukraine must not feel forced into doing what Russia says. Nigel says, I don't think it's the Nigel Farage, I think he's on holiday, but Nigel says, wasn't Ukraine neutral in 2014 when they lost Crimea? Where did that get them? And Arthur says any agreement must be underwritten by the UN to ensure future backtracking on either side. Mickey says everyone wants this violence to end, but it must end with Russia gaining no advantage for their vile attack. And Ozzy says nope, he will use the bomb to prove a point. What's your thoughts? Tweet me at Michelle Dubes, or you can email at Farage at gbnews.uk. When we come back, this is why I'm very pleased indeed that I've managed to cover this show tonight. Why? Because I get to have a drink. And every single day on this show, we interview someone that's achieving interesting things, that's been in interesting places, and has a bit of an interesting backstory. Tonight, I will be meeting with the businessman extraordinaire. He used to own Crystal Palace. He's an award-winning broadcaster, and he has the privilege of living with me. I'll see you in just a couple of minutes.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamonn Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamonn
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, welcome back to Farage with me, Michelle Dewberry. Lots of comments coming in, by the way, about the whole Will Smith debacle. Got to say, most of you so far that I've seen are saying you don't believe it, that it was all set up. Was it? I'm not so sure myself. Anyway, get in touch. You can tweet me at Michelle Dubes. Let me know your thoughts on that. But for now, one of my favourite parts of the show. This is the only reason I said yes to covering this, because I get a free drink, and I'm a northerner, and when there is free alcohol, we're there, what can I say? And tonight, there is a man appearing that has been basically begging to come on the show with me for weeks, months. Every night I say, no, you cannot. But tonight, I decided to make an exception. I speak of the businessman extraordinaire who made millions, 80 million in fact, by the age of 31 in the field of mobile phones. He was the first, youngest, should I say, person to ever own a Premier League football club. And he's done huge amounts ever since. Restaurants, films, properties, you name it. His highlight of his life is living with me, isn't it? Simon
Indeed.
Jordan.
Indeed.
I've managed all the time, haven't I? You asked to come on this show, Jubes & Co. with me.
Yeah, if asking to come on this show is equivalent to saying, not if you tied my tongue to the back of a bus and dragged me here, then I guess, yes, asking on the show is what I wanted to do.
Simon Jordan, good evening to you. Just do a nice little cheers.
Nice to see you.
Simon's got a gin and tonic.
Home from home.
Yeah, the worst looking gin and tonic I've ever seen in my life. Apologies for that.
No lemon.
Tell me, no lemon. I mean, what's going on here? No lemon for
Enough
Simon
of the one
Jordan.
sitting opposite me.
Simon.
Tell me.
You know, you made, I've got it written here, 80 million pounds by the age of 31. How did you do that?
By being effective in the industry that I was in, by having a lot of ambition, a lot of determination, knowing what I was doing, working hard, and taking advantage of an industry that lent itself to enormous growth. You know, it was an interesting time. I was very ambitious. I was very focused. I was young, but I was also aware enough of how the world is held together, having been in businesses before, having had failures before. People talk about successes in life and all the achievements they have. And I've seen a lot of people come on here, mates of mine like Theo Paphitis, and they talk about the things that they do in their lives. But success is like an iceberg. All the rubbish and all the failures are beneath the surface, and all the things that you do well are the things that you see above it. So you take lots of things from successes and failure builds up the ability to overcome adversity. So how I did it was an industry that lent itself to that sort of growth. I built 250 shops in 5 years, never borrowed any money, never had any investors, never had an overdraft, but just had an innate ability to be able to maximise the industry that I was in. And of course, I had good people working alongside me, a good staff, and I was a motivated leader. So all of that afforded an opportunity, and I had the wherewithal at the time to be able to capitalise on it.
And what did you do once you'd capitalise? Once you've got this big bag of money, what then?
Well, it's one of those things I often debate about equitable swaps. You know, the idea of cashing in. I never really wanted to sell the business, but one of my shareholders, that was one of my startup partners, was very keen to want to sell, and he'd been keen to sell for some time. And because of the construction of equity in our business, it made it slightly more incumbent upon me to do so. So I looked at it and thought the industry is probably at its peak now in terms of businesses like mine that have started up, that run hard and fast and really run for the finishing line of being successful. And there was an opportunity. So I took it, I sold it, I swapped it for a bag of cash. Now that's the equitability side of things, because one of the things you do, if you do things for success, money is a caveat and it's a qualification. But for me, it was never the benchmark. So I needed something else to inspire me, motivate me and challenge me. So I figured I'd have this sort of Dr. Pepper moment. How difficult can it be? I know, I'll buy the football club that my father used to play for. So I decided that that was the way to go, to buy a football club, because I had a sportsman's mentality, having had a father that played football, having been in and around football myself and been on the books of various professional football clubs, Chelsea and Crystal Palace included. And I just thought it was the right time, with a balance of ego and ambition and wanting to make sure everyone knew that I'd been successful, that a football club might lend itself to my personality and my drive. And it was also at a time when that industry was going like that in terms of broadcast deals, and the opportunity for football to be a proper, mature industry was beginning to manifest itself.
And you know, you talk about football, and you know, I'm reliably informed that frequently opposing fans would sing to you in the stands in a not very flattering manner. So, for example, I hear that they would sing, "Simon Jordan is a beep, is a beep." We live in a society now, Simon, where kind of offence and being offensive, you know, you can't say certain things. And I wonder, you know, you have been hated by many football fans, called names, as I just explained.
No, that's not true. I mean, football is very tribalistic, and I was a very young owner, and I was very in your face, you know, and I had very strong opinions. I wasn't interested in the backdrop of the nonsense that went before and all the self-serving drivel that I thought football perpetuated. I was going to make sure that my point was heard. I was also in a very high-profile set of circumstances in my life, from the business that I invested in to the people that I hung around with. And so it brought me to the fore. And when things happened, I didn't pull away. I didn't pull any punches. I wasn't political in my views. If Birmingham City wanted to nick my football manager, which they did, I was very strident about my attitude towards Birmingham, saying things like, why would he want to go there? What's the best thing about Birmingham? The road out. Why would he go to a club that's never been in the Premier League? What was the last thing that Birmingham have ever won? Nothing. So that's going to make you, with people, slightly unpopular with certain segments of their fan bases. But also in the football fraternity, what people knew was I said what I meant, and I meant what I said, and I also had the courage of my convictions. That's why managers that mucked about with me got injunctions put against them. That's why managers that tried to tell lies...
In quite spectacular ways, by the way.
Yeah.
Is it Ian Dowie?
Yep, that was a writ. That was a writ. That was my sort of Lee Harvey Oswald moment for TV. Now, they talk about Lee Harvey Oswald being shot in America, never turning TV off after that because they would have missed something. I served a writ on a press conference for a manager that had lied to me about wanting to leave the club to move back to the north, and actually ended up about 2 miles down the road to one of our biggest rivals. So I think he thought he was funny, and I think he thought he was clever trying or artificially manufacturing a situation where the £1 million compensation that we were due to be paid would be obviated by me allowing him out his contract on goodwill. He thought that was clever, so served him with a writ live on television, then took him to court, and then got him convicted for fraudulent misrepresentation, which is the hardest case to prove. So people took that with both measures of, OK, you can be a little bit of a Flash Herbert sometimes, and a little bit, you know, you live in Spain, you've always got a tan, your hair was blonde, and you drive a Ferrari.
Funny you should mention your hair. Let's look at your hair, by the way, as we're talking. Got some pictures of your great hair. Look at that.
Why would you do such a thing? It's called treachery.
Let me be clear. I was just about to say you got off lightly, because some of the states of your hair, I mean, good grief. I had to find pictures that I could actually use. I mean, what on God's green earth was you thinking? Look at that.
Well, the tragedy of it is my mother works in the beauty industry, and she was spending a lot of time talking to me about my hair, and I thought at the time it was the look. I did okay, Michelle.
That's not you, is it?
Yeah, that's me and Trevor Sinclair.
That's you?
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Well, that's me after I met you, so I look haggard, drawn, beaten up, and ready to fall over.
You look awful. I've not...
Like I just said.
Very off-putting. Anyway, you work now, you do a lot of things now, but one of the things you do is in the media.
Yes,
now,
I do.
I find it fascinating because, like you, my background's not particularly media. I find myself in the media.
Yep.
I wonder, what role do you think the media plays in this country? Do you think it's a force for good?
I have mixed emotions about it, because I think mainstream media is in a very invidious position, because social media drives the agenda and mainstream media comes in and colours the gaps in now. So it has to run along a certain parameter. Also, with the advent of 24-hour rolling news, which I think is one of the greatest evils, because it's a content-driven business where it needs to keep on driving content and self-perpetuating. You need to have 15 different epidemiologists on to be able to contradict one another so the next news cycle can be fed during COVID. We need to have 15 different economic guys on to argue about the pros and cons of inflation so that media cycles can drive their content and then can drive their advertising revenues and fulfill their model. I do think, and it's an irony, that I sit inside the media, but I'm quite privileged because I can sit inside the media and within reason, I can say what I want and get away with saying what I want within reason, because there is an element of responsibility. You can't run around saying exactly what you please, not just because of Ofcom guidelines, but because you can't and you shouldn't. There should be some form of responsibility behind what you do and don't say.
Really? So people shouldn't be able to say? Do you think people have got a right not to be offended?
No. I think it depends what you take offence at. I mean, I do think one of the the byproducts of our society is a lack of resilience, and I do think people should remember that when people call them names, then most of the time they're total strangers. As you have pointed out, I had 25,000 fans inside football stadiums that didn't like me calling me rude names. I'm in the mindset, and maybe it's generational, there's only one thing worse than people talking about you, is people not talking about you. So I take that sort of mindset, and I don't really care about the opinions of total strangers. When it becomes the opinions of valued peers and you're overreaching and your grasp is being exceeded by your reach, then you should think about some of the things you say. But I do sit there. I sit here watching news channels. I watch your channel. I watch the Sky News of the world and other people and Sky Sports and want to put my foot through the television for some of
What? Shut up. That's not you going off script,
But through some of the
Simon.
disingenuity and duplicity and double standards and lack of education, lack of awareness and binary thoughts, because nothing is binary. We don't live in this world where there's no nuance, and it doesn't seem to be a propensity or desire for nuance to be part of any conversation, whether it's COVID, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's economics, whether it's Brexit.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think people are entranced in their positions. They don't understand how to debate things. They don't have an open mind. They don't want to have an open mind. And there's agendas. If you look at some of the biases through the last 2 years about the manner in which certain broadcasters have represented information, if you look at the way that the Brexit situation, be for it or against it, if you look at the BBC for the way they advanced Brexit, every time you went onto a TV show like Question Time, which I did, you would find yourself on there with 3 Remainers and 1 Brexiteer. That's not a balanced conversation. That's a weighted dialogue. So I do feel that broadcasting lacks responsibility.
Well, Morgan wants to know, he's been in touch, do you think Palace will make the FA Cup final?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I'm not a great fan of the owner because I think he's a bit of a weasel, but the bottom line is I do hope the club that I formerly owned, spent 50 million quid of my money in and put a lot of time and energy in, continues to prosper.
Well, there you go, Morgan. Straight to the point there. John has been in touch saying, Michelle, this is a whole barrage the Farage. This is a segment that Nigel does every night. John says, do you agree that the government should nationalise P&O if they can't afford to run the company properly? Simon, we've just been speaking about business. I made my point known earlier on. What's your thought about the handling of the whole P&O debacle, the way the government's got involved?
Yeah, well, I'm not keen for the government to be involved in things unless we can possibly help it, because the level of incompetence in politics beggars belief. But if you look at this situation with P&O, if you've got 800 British workers operating out of British ports under British licence, you take loans and you have furlough, then you have a responsibility to honour the obligations of British law. One of the beauties, I suspect, of Brexit is we'll be able to write our own law so that not only will we be able to protect our waters from smugglers, we'll be able to protect them from pirates like the guys that own P&O. The problem is also, when you try to resolve this situation, don't be under any illusion how difficult the unions would have been to deal with. But the handling of these staff, the manner in which these staff was handled was deplorable. I had 2,000 staff. They can be your biggest asset and your biggest liability, but they had no business handling this staff in this fashion.
And very briefly, yes or no, do you think the government should nationalise P&O?
I don't think the government can run a bath, so I'm not entirely sure they should be running industries.
Right, well, I think that's a no. Is that a no, safe to say? It's a no.
It's a no.
It's a no from Simon. Coming up next, Mark Stein will be keeping you company. First, though, the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGiven. Some parts of the UK have enjoyed 10 days of sunshine, but there'll be a lot more cloud over the next 24 hours and beyond. Showers in places as well, and feeling cooler on Tuesday before it turns colder Wednesday onwards. Arctic air is on the way. It's behind a cold front which is pushing into the north of Scotland during Monday night. Another front is moving up from the south to bring rain to southern counties of England overnight, and a few showers remain across northern England, southern Scotland as well. A lot of low cloud creeps in from the North Sea to affect parts of eastern and central England. So it's a cloudy start to Tuesday, but a mild start, 5 to 9 Celsius compared to what's to come. Then, as we go through Tuesday morning, showers continue to affect the south coast, and further outbreaks of rain will affect the north coast of Scotland. And this is a cold front that's coming south. It's going to bring some sleet and snow over the hills, but more significantly, a marked temperature drop for the Northern Isles with some sleet and snow showers here, compared with the mild air that hangs on elsewhere. Although with cloudier skies, it's certainly going to be cooler, 11 to 13 Celsius for England, Wales, Northern Ireland, southern Scotland. Into Tuesday night, showers affecting Scotland on the wintry side for the far north, but rain and hill snow predominantly for southern Scotland.